Thanks for tuning in to Jets FM on EOFN for this Tuesday, the 24th of December, 2019, brought to you by ourlads.com, providing the best New York Jets depth charts in the business. Jan, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, all that jazz, and let's hope next year in this festival time of year that we'll be thinking and dreaming about the playoffs, but not this year.
That would be very nice. Very, very nice to have. Positive. There are positive signs. Granted, you and I have been through this rigmarole many times before.
Unfortunately.
Nice, you've gone 5-2 after 1-7,
Yeah,
but you
sure.
went 1-7 to start the year. So, it doesn't. What you've done now is very nice to me. I find it to a certain extent window dressing. I mean, there's still issues that need to be remediated. There's still talent that needs to be imported. But there are positive signs, but it's something that you and I have said before, as I just mentioned, and everybody knows that, yeah, we have good things moving for the future. Next year is going to be our year, and then next year starts, and you're stuck in the same time warp all over again and end up in the same place. So, as you said, the hope is that next year we can stop saying, wait till next year, and next year will be this year, and we'll be going into the last week of the season, either with a playoff spot clinched or really in contention for a playoff spot and controlling destiny.
Yeah, I mean, take a look at the league. I mean, for the fact that the Oakland Raiders still have a chance for the playoffs just shows you that as long as Douglas does his job this offseason and correctly makes the right moves at the draft and free agency, and we actually can stay healthy, how are we not in playoff contention next year?
Well, I mean, the schedule is going to be harder, right? So it's
Oh,
funny.
it can't be any harder than this past year.
Okay. I mean, you look. It's funny. Like, I'm a Niners fan also, right? So you look at right now, and I said this literally as the game was going on that night. If you look at the first Seattle game, right, we talk about how coaching decisions make a material difference, even small things, right? So Niners got the ball back, a minute to go at their own 20. They had a game lead on the 2-game lead, I think, on Seattle at the time. All they had to do, Seattle had no timeouts left. Play for the tie. You get the tie. You already would have clinched the division. B, you already would have clinched first place in the conference. Now you have to beat Seattle in order to get the number 1 seed on Sunday night, as opposed to just cruising into the playoffs and kicking your feet up. And these are things we talk about a lot, about how coaches' decisions make a material difference. Even small things, the other night going in the game, I think it was the Browns game. Kitchens got ripped for going for 2 points by following the card we had no reason to go to. These are the things that get coaches fired because they just make stupid decisions and don't think with their head and don't they look at the ramifications of what's going on. And you look at this year, at least with the Jets, right? We talked a lot about, was Adam Gase the right guy? And again, the jury is still out on whether or not he is or he isn't. But you hear what the players say of a lot of what happened in the locker room, and part of that could be lip service because they're still in the contact for the Jets. But you hear a lot of how the locker room didn't fracture, how the locker room stayed together, how they kept pushing and pushing. Even you read the stuff from Le'Veon Bell, who very clearly could have blown up, knowing that Gase did not appear, and I use it in quotes because you and I have talked about this, to want to have him there. But that's a mark of hopefully a coaching staff that is making the players get better. And one
Yes.
of those prime evidences is the guy who you and I have talked a lot about, and you have never, I'll say not never, you've not always been a fan of his and don't view him as a number one. But Robbie Anderson is really taking leaps and bounds forward in front of our
Sure.
eyes every
Yes.
single week.
And you got to credit, like you said, you got to credit the coaching staff, especially. I think we have to all. I mean, put it right on Hines Ward. I mean, he's doing a great job. Who was there? Who was the other?
Isn't it Jefferson? I thought it's Sean
Yeah,
Jefferson.
Jefferson. You got to give him a lot of credit. And we talked about this in the offseason as well, that this was a good coaching staff, and a good head coach is going to surround himself with better coaches. And that's exactly what he's done. And that's what he did. We talked about the excitement of that, the offensive line with Pollock, with Greg Williams, and then it goes down the line with these guys like Jefferson and Hines Ward and so forth and so on. So it's a good staff. They've collectively have done a very good job of keeping this team together. We know half this team is probably not even going to be here next year. But the core guys, look, the Robbie Anderson thing, it's interesting because for a couple of years, what we were saying about Robbie Anderson, I don't know if I'm sure you noticed, all of a sudden everybody started talking about it the last month, about how he was just a one-trick pony, and he's turned that in himself into more than that, and that's exactly what he's done. And we're going to give him credit where credit is due. But he was at a place where he wasn't that guy. Do we think he has the ability to be a number one still? Well, look, NFL championship teams don't always need superstar number ones. So can this team be a very successful playoff contender with him as our top guy? Yeah, I think we can, but we better have a really good number two, somebody sandwiched in between Herndon, Crowder, and Anderson, somebody that is also maybe size, somebody that's a bigger target, because Anderson sure is playing big, which is something that I just was never sure that he was going to be able to do.
I agree. I mean, you look at the catch he made the other day. I mean, going up between two guys to make the reception to pull it in for the touchdown. I mean, I talked last week with you about how he's finally running the route tree, right? It's the in cuts, it's the out cuts, it's the head fakes, it's the shoulder fakes, it's the ability to set up a defensive back to find space. And last week, Darnold had tons of time 2 weeks ago to find him and missed him. This week, the game plan was a little different in terms of how they utilized Anderson and how they threw the ball based upon the Steeler defense. But when he had to go up and make a play, and he did in between two guys, he went up and made a tremendous catch for the touchdown. And the key is going to be, do you view his last 6 weeks as being the true Anderson, or the first 10 weeks of the season? And it's the second year in a row this has happened where he's come on kind of the latter third to half of the season. And B, more importantly, is what kind of dollars is he's going to want in free agency? I personally believe he wants to stay here. I think he thinks that there's growth that he can still have here. I think he still is appreciative of the fact that the Jets are the one that took a chance on him. But as you and I both know, when it comes to free agency and it comes to dollars, the almighty dollar unfortunately talks, right? And it all depends on how close the Jets get to the offer that he thinks he should receive as to whether or not he wants to stay or not. But right now, you look at the rest of the receiving crew. Crowder's had a good year as a slot guy. Herndon, unfortunately, because of the suspension in the industry and the injuries, the jury is very much still out on what Chris Herndon is going to be. I think you and I both are viewing him as a number one tight end.
Sure.
But the benefit is you have Griffith who stepped up.
Yes.
You have Wesco who finally made a play this week. And you look at the depth at tight end, especially if Herndon does come back. And
it's solid.
We're set at tight end.
Yep.
We're set if we bring back Anderson
and
as
Crowder.
a 1 or 2. You're set with Crowder as a 3. Now you need at least two more receivers, a number 1, number 2.
And they might remember we talked about Demaryius Thomas. If his health, and he felt that he was back to his form. Look, he's still older though. And that's the thing they have to. No matter how 100% he is, he's still an older guy. They're gonna have to make that determination. But look, they traded a draft pick for him. So I get the feeling, as good as a locker room guy he is, he's going to get every chance to make the team next year. And I think he probably will. The question's going to be the competition with guys like Vincent Smith, because I don't think you go out and get a free agent. I think what you do is, this is such a deep class of receivers. You've got to grab one of these guys.
I agree. And you have Smith, and we talked about Berrios can make a play periodically at times also. But Smith showed that he could be maybe your 4 or your 5.
Could be.
Depending on how everybody else slots. But you do need I don't know if you need an elite receiver, but you need another top shelf kind of receiver is probably the way I'd refer to it.
Yeah, because if you look at the receivers that you can take a look at this week, now Jerry Jeudy has got the type of talent, almost like Jerry Rice type talent, the way that he runs his routes, his build. That's what he reminds me of. But is he going to be a superstar? Ridley is probably the best example of these Alabama receivers and these Alabama players in general. I get so suspicious of drafting Alabama players because it seems like for every Minkah Fitzpatrick, there's like 3 or 4 guys who just don't ever become the type of players that they were in college. So they've got to make sure. And I don't know if Jeudy will even be available. I don't think he will be.
I don't think he's slipping to 10.
No. So you got to
going top 5. Honestly,
you got to look at guys like T. Higgins, who will be playing in the playoff game against Ohio State. Love the matchup. Hopefully, we'll get of Jeff Okudah Another guy who probably won't be available for the Jets, the number one corner right now for Ohio State, going up against T. Higgins. Higgins probably be available if the Jets want to go that way, but the other thing is the Georgia lineman, who is right now the consensus number one guy.
Thomas.
Yeah, he's not playing in the bowl, so I don't know. Is he going to be available when the Jets
No, I
pick?
don't think so either. I hear top 7, top 6, top 7. I mean, there's a handful of linemen,
especially since he's
that
the
are in
one
that
guy.
range.
Yeah, he's
Look,
the one guy. So
my opinion is, and you and I have talked about it, the offensive line needs major work. You have
absolutely.
to grab
That's the number one
a
concern.
stud.
Absolutely.
You have to grab a stud lineman, in my opinion. If there's a guy there who you view as a fixture or a potential fixture for 10 years at a spot,
Yeah, sure.
you have to grab that guy.
Well, Tristan Wirfs is probably the guy that makes the most sense based on where he's going to go. Keep an eye on him against USC in the Holiday Bowl. So he's the guy that where the Jets are going to pick. Or, of course, if the Jets decide, which we hope, when you're in that area where the Jets are and there are still going to be some quarterbacks available potentially, we hope that we're that type of team that will trade down 2 or 3 spots, get a couple of extra picks, and then maybe even still grab a guy like Wirfs. So, but these are all the things that we'll talk more about later
we
on.
have plenty of time for that one.
Yeah,
We have
and-
4 months for that.
And then the other question is, do they go linebacker, pass rush? You know, and
If there's an elite guy there,
well,
but I don't know if
Curtis Weaver would fit because he had a monster season. He's been a great pass rusher for Boise State the last few years. His season's done, so he's going to be a guy to keep an eye on. Isaiah Simmons, I'm not really. He'll probably go in the top 10. I'm not worried about that. He's a good player. He'll play against Ohio State. You can keep an eye on him, but I'm not so sure. He's not as a pass rusher guy. He's more of a really good all-around linebacker. So we'll talk more about that, but I think there will be a couple of pass rushing talents that when I was looking at everybody's boards that could even be available late first, second round, and that's where it's going to be up to Joe Douglas to make the right call because anybody can pick a top guy in the top 10, but how good you are in scouting comes with your later draft picks.
Well, I mean, the hope is you and I talked about this, right? Is Douglas's pedigree as being an offensive lineman and his ability to judge linemen this is where it should hopefully prove beneficial, regardless of which round you grab somebody in. Hopefully that Douglas's ability to evaluate the position is something that pans out to the type of pick that they get, right? So that's kind of point one. The other piece I wanted to kind of get to, it's something, you and I talked a lot about this at the beginning of the season, right? Jamal Adams, rightfully so, gets all of the attention, and he deservedly so gets the attention. And you and I talked a little bit when the year started how it'd be interesting to see if Marcus May stayed healthy, which he hadn't, and that was a big knock on him. What kind of season could Marcus May have? Well, we kind of saw this season what happens when he's healthy, and while there's a lot of growth that still has to happen, and we saw also what the good and the bad of defensive backs. We talked a lot about Bless Austin, who got completely burned for the touchdown and kind of got benched afterwards, and it's the first time he got burned. It's a learning experience.
Oh,
but
he'll get burned again.
Right, he will. And that's the nature of the beast, right? But it's a learning experience, and hopefully he grows from it. And it's the first time in the 5-6 games he's played. Yeah, it's happened. Not ideal, but clearly something that's beneficial. And in a year like this, where you want the growth and the learning experiences, and right now the wins don't really matter, but you look at the play that made at the end of the game, which was a top shelf, elite kind of safety kind of a play, and you just have to start thinking, if May can stay healthy, and they sign him. And they sign Adams, and you keep those two guys back there, you have your safety crew for the next 5 to 7 years, hopefully. And granted, projecting health and everything else, but May made an elite play on that ball to knock the ball out of the Steelers wide receiver, out of Washington's hands, and prevent a really damaging loss from a psyche perspective in that game. And that was all on May, and all on his athleticism and all on his ability on the field.
Yeah, and it's good to see not only May, but Mollett is playing really well, really physical for his size, which is something we talked about a few weeks ago. These guys are and that's Greg Williams. They bring such a physicality to the game each week that even though they're not as talented on paper, when you bring it every week, like these guys are, and they know they're fighting for spots too, it's good to see that they're coming through, and that's going to be a big boost to the secondary next year when you can go, okay, you can go with Mollett, you can go Bless Austin. And I'm really happy that they've played all these guys, even Canada and so forth, over somebody like Darryl Roberts. Because we know what Darryl Roberts is. We've said it all along. I mean,
Yep.
he's an okay guy. He's a 5th or 6th DB at best. He's not a starter, and I'm glad that these other guys have deserved an opportunity to play, and they've obviously done a good job. And kudos also once again to Basham. I mean, this guy's making plays every week, and that's great to see. He had a very good career at college at Ohio. So it didn't work out in Indianapolis. It's working out here for him with the Jets. So good to see that that these types of guys, and Phillips and Fudakasi and so forth, that they're all coming through.
That you've typed a lot about, right? Phillips is a guy that you've talked a lot about all year long.
Yep.
Right, and that's one where you have to give Maccagnan the credit for signing him and bringing him in.
Absolutely, and we never looked at Mike Maccagnan as a complete waste. He made some good decisions. He made some bad decisions. The thing that I like is reading in the paper Brian Costello talking about the synergy that he's never seen before between Gase and Douglas. You know, the scouting department. Everybody seems to get along, and that's something that, whether you like Maccagnan or didn't like Maccagnan, that his disposition for whatever it was, it just didn't vibe really well with the organization. And that's why I think that's why I think Chris Johnson was so excited this offseason about bringing Gase in and bringing Douglas in, because he saw that behind closed doors. He knew what was going on before, and to bring this in, that's exciting him. Now it's up to these guys to, of course, get it done and give them the first chance to get it done, because they were not together, Gase and Douglas, around this time last year.
There is clearly I would say, a synergy between the departments that maybe didn't exist, right? So that's something that was a issue in the past, but now seems to be something that is a clear positive direction in the organization, which is something we may not have had in the past. And you hope that Douglas's background in that, right? We hope Maccagnan's background was going to help. Jury clearly, in terms of some of the draft picks, is still out. But now you have to hope that what we've seen so far out of Douglas, at least early stages, right? There's still a long way to go in terms of what's going to be. But early stages has to be viewed as a positive in terms of what's going on within the organization, at least in that regard.
And as far as contracts with Anderson, I think everybody knows by now, because everybody's saying it. And I'm happy to hear that, because this is what we've said all along, that you sign him for a good deal. If somebody overpays him, you let him go. That's just, I think everybody agrees to that. I'm glad everybody's saying that. And I certainly hope that Joe Douglas does that as well. And I think he would. I don't think he's going to over price, because you've got a guy like Jamal Adams you have to sign. You're eventually going to have to sign Darnold as well. And if I'm Douglas, to tell you the truth, I'm signing Marcus May this offseason. And the reason I'm doing it is because May's injury history, I'm going to use that as a plus. Because I think Marcus May, knowing his injury history, will take a little bit less than market value, because he wants to make sure he's got insurance, and that'll help the Jets. It'll be a little bit of a gamble, because if May gets hurt next year, but I think that's the kind of contract that I think it's worth a gamble, is that you sign Marcus May now, less market value, you take the chance he's going to be healthy next year, and you get a bargain.
Absolutely. I think you try to get him into a quote-unquote below market price, more so in terms of the future, right? So you may overpay a little bit now, but the hope is that on the back end you make it up, because you signed him to a more of a team-friendly contract, where if you let him go another year and he has another big year, then it's going to cost you even more in free agency.
Yep. And then of course, Adams, this whole talk about him, once again, I think it's hearing about how the Jets were trying to trade him. Again, lazy journalism. The Jets were not trying to trade him. I don't know if you watch Hockey Night in Canada every week, but did you watch it last week?
Don't think I did.
Okay, because they had on what was his name? Quinn. No, not Quinn. What was the other guy's name? The other ex-Vancouver guy. That's their top guy now.
Burke?
Yes, Burke. So they had Burke on, and he was talking about what, like, kind of behind the scenes of how he would trade or potentially try to trade a player and how he would communicate that with the agent, so forth and so on. It was very educational. And basically, what it meant to me, which is what I kind of knew all along anyway, but it validated it, is look, if you're going to trade a guy, you want to trade a guy, what you're going to do is you're going to get on the phone, you're going to get on the phone with the agent, you're going to tell these guys, hey, this is what we want for Jamal Adams. So if you can go out and get this for us, then we'll take it. But that's not what happened. He basically got phone calls and said, hey, are you interested in trading Jamal Adams? And of course, you'd have to be an idiot GM, no matter what these other guys on television, these former players want to tell you, the Ryan Clarks of the world. Yes, you don't. No, you do not hang up the phone. You actually listen to what they say. Because if they want to give you a Herschel Walker deal, you'd be an idiot to hang up the phone. But more than likely, you're not going to get that deal, but you listen anyway because it's important for you as a GM, a first-time GM, to take every call so you can find out, well, how does this other GM value my player? And exactly how this might help me down the road when I may have to talk to this guy for another deal.
Adams's displeasure was the fact that in general they were willing to listen, right? Which any good GM is going to do. And then it got in the media, and then it got out there that he was quote unquote looking to move him, right? So the narrative and the story changed based upon what was actually happening, which was he received a phone call and didn't just hang up on the guy, as opposed to actively trying to move him. And I think Adams was more annoyed that as opposed to him just hanging up the phone, which no good GM would do. Look, if somebody's going to offer you a Herschel Walker type return, where you're getting, let's say, 4 number 1 picks, and yeah, of course you're going to listen to.
Of course.
Versus him actively calling around and going, hey, I have Jamal Adams available. What would you give me for
Big difference, yes. Look, I don't think there's any way that Jamal Adams is being moved because nobody's going to get. Because I understand what people say about safety position comparable to quarterback, pass rusher, offensive line, corner, the pecking order of what you pay a safety. I get that. That's part of the reason why no matter how good Jamal Adams is, he's never going to get that type of deal, that type of Herschel Walker compensation. It's not going to happen. So since you're never going to get that type of compensation package, I mean, you have to be a complete idiot to trade him. So he's not going anywhere. I would expect, too, that they sign him this offseason. It'd be a great move to get all that out of the way, to say, we trust you. We want you here for a long time. We want May here for a long time. And you know what? Let's hold a press conference with Jamal Adams on the right and Marcus May on the left and introduce them to long-term deals on the same day.
That would be nice. That would also send a message to the organization and to the players.
And as far as the offensive line, and Bell, lastly, before we go, once again, I think if there's one player on this offensive line, and I'm not talking about Alex Lewis because Alex Lewis to me is still kind of like a sixth lineman that you can kind of put in different areas of your line. You could start him and you'd be okay with because we're not even sure if he could ever stay healthy. He's banged up again. So I'm talking like legitimate starting guys. I still think that if they are going to get 3 new offensive linemen, I still believe Kelvin Beachum could be the one guy left standing. Because of his locker room presence, he's still a solid player. You're not going to have to pay for him. So Duga's still a young kid too, so I'm not even going to go down that road either. But I think the one veteran that I still think if I'm looking at a guy that I would not be surprised it remains here next year and starts, it's Beachum.
I agree. We talked about it a couple of times. I think just as much for his locker room presence as his on-field play, and we've seen when he's played. He's able to play through injuries,
and he's a solid player.
He's not elite,
nope,
but he is a solid offensive lineman.
And finally, Le'Veon Bell. I don't think anybody is going to give up the Jets if they are. Look, I'm sure they're going to listen to offers. They did again at the deadline. But I don't think a team is going to make a deal that's going to be worth it for the Jets. Look, if they give up, hey, we'll give you a second-round draft pick, something like that, that might be interesting. I don't think that's going to happen. But unless it's a deal where, hey, cross the teletype, Jets trade Le'Veon Bell, I think if it happens, I think we're going to be happy with the compensation. Otherwise, they're just not going to trade him to trade him. I just don't think that they're going to go, oh, he's too expensive. I think the Jets could afford him. And I also think when the Jets bolster their offensive line and there are more playoff-ready offense, Le'Veon Bell's talents are going to be that much more noticeable, and he's going to look more and more like the player that we saw in Pittsburgh a few years ago. And that's an important player to have on your team.
Agreed. And I think there is, I will call it a possibility he goes. I will not put any kind of adjectives or adverbs on there in terms of the likelihood he goes, right? So I'm not saying it's a remote, it's a probable, it's a slim, it's whatever. Possible, yes. I will say not probable that he goes. I honestly think he's going to be back here next year.
All right, and we'll talk more about the team with the season ending at some point. Not sure when we're going to be back. Could be in the next few weeks. Who knows? But the fact is the good thing about football is when the season ends, we don't have much time. The Super Bowl, when it ends, there's a month, and then free agency kicks in. So at some point, Jan, we're going to talk again in the next several weeks. And when we do, we'll seriously be able to talk about free agency and the draft. So, and at this point in the rebuild, which is still kind of a rebuild for this organization, it's going to be an exciting time for us.
Agreed.
Happy Christmas, happy Hanukkah, happy New Year, all that jazz, as I said in the open, Jan, for you and the listeners. And it was great having you on for this season, even though it was another non-playoff season, Jan. But I'm very confident that one of these years, especially maybe next year, we'll be doing some playoff shows.
Sounds good to me. Looking forward to it.
All right. So thanks, Jan. Thanks, everybody listening out there. We'll talk to you in 2020.